Hi, so I just want to talk about something real quick, and what I want to talk about in this video is about the 1985 earthquake in Mexico. Before the video starts, I just want to mention that I am not a geologist, nor am I a teacher. I am just reading publicly available online documents or articles, and trying my best to understand the information that is in them. So this is why I am encouraging you to do your own research, just in case if I accidentally misrepresent the information within the documents or articles. You could also check the description box or the caption below to see the links for the stuff that I used in this video. Alright, so let's get into this video. Alright, so we're going to use part of this Wikipedia article. On the 19th of September 1985 at 7:17 a.m., a magnitude 8 earthquake struck Mexico City, which had a maximal Mercalli intensity of 9. Alright, so we're going to take a short look at this article from Britannica. Many sources place the location of the earthquake's epicenter in the state of Michoacan, in a region of tectonic tension between the North American plate and the subducting Cocos plate. However, some people place the earthquake's epicenter just off of the coast of Michoacan in the Pacific Ocean, so it looks like there's a small amount of uncertainty as to where the exact location of the earthquake's epicenter was. Alright, so we're going to use an interactive map of the area from USGS. Before we do that, we could take note of the hypocenter, which is the depth within the earth where the earthquake originated. The shallower the depth, the more destructive the earthquake will be. USGS shows that it was 27.9 kilometers within the earth. However, I noticed on Wikipedia that it said the hypocenter was 20 kilometers. Anyways, that yellow star is the earthquake's epicenter. That red spiky line is a convergent plate boundary subduction zone. Here is where the epicenter of the earthquake is located on Google Maps. Alright, so we'll take a look at part of this article. This gives the coordinates for the other location where some have placed the epicenter of the earthquake. Here's a look on Google Maps of the other area where some have placed the epicenter to be. Here I took both of the screenshots of the epicenter locations from Google Maps and I stacked them one on top of the other. I made one of the screenshots semi-transparent and I tried to align them as close as I possibly could so you could see the difference in the locations. Alright, so before the main earthquake, it was said that there was a 5.2 foreshock that happened earlier in the year in the month of May. Let's take a look at it using USGS. The yellow star is the earthquake's epicenter and the red spiky line is the convergent plate boundary subduction zone. It's around this area where the main earthquake happened. Anyways, this foreshock made me curious, so I decided to use the search earthquake catalog from USGS to see if it had other earthquakes before the main earthquake. I put the time period from the beginning of that year till the main earthquake of that year. This was the search zone and it was searching for magnitude 1 and above. These were all the results that I got starting from the beginning of 1985 till the main earthquake, which was on the 19th of September 1985. On your own time, you could go and look at these individual earthquakes to see for yourself as to where they were located. After seeing all of these earthquakes which happened before the main earthquake, I still a little confused as to how it was only the one in May that was classed as a foreshock. But anyways, let's move on. Alright, so after the main earthquake, there were aftershocks that were recorded. I did not find any online article that specifically stated how much aftershocks happened after the main earthquake. I was only finding information about 2 major aftershocks. However, we could once more use the search earthquake catalog from USGS to try to get an idea of how much aftershocks happened. The time period that I'm using starts from the time of the main earthquake till the time of the last aftershock. I am also more or less using the same search area that I used for the foreshocks, as well as I am searching for magnitude 1 and upwards. Here are the results that I got from the time of the main earthquake till the time of the last recorded aftershock. Now, I do not know if all of these earthquakes that you are seeing here is classed as an aftershock for the main earthquake. On your own time, you could go up online and search up more about this to see the locations of these earthquakes that you're seeing here. Alright, so let's take a look at the two major aftershocks. So we'll be using USGS to view it. It happened on the very next day, which is the 20th. You will notice that this saying the 21st. However, this is using the UTC time zone, while this area in Mexico uses the CST time zone, which is 6 hours behind the UTC time zone. And since this is using 24 hours time, it would have been on the 20th of September 1985 at 7:37 p.m. Anyways, you could also take note of the hypocenter. Alright, so the yellow star is the earthquake's epicenter and the red spiky line is the subduction zone, which is the convergent plate boundary. This is around the area where the main earthquake was. Alright, so we also using USGS to view the other major aftershock. I don't understand how this could be classed as an aftershock because it happened in the next year in April on the 30th day, as well as it's a pretty big magnitude, so I thought that it could have been classed as its own event. Anyways, the yellow star is the earthquake's epicenter. The red spiky line is the convergent plate boundary subduction zone. This is around the area where the main earthquake happened. Alright, so now we'll be using this interactive earthquake browser to view the earthquakes in that area in Mexico. Here is the time period that I used, which is from the 1st of January 1985 till the 1st of May 1986, and I'm searching from all magnitudes. All the colored circles are earthquakes. Pay attention to what the depth of the color of the circle means, as well as what magnitude the size of the circle represents. You could also take note of the types of the plate boundaries based off of the colors. Here's a quick overview of the area. This is the epicenter of the foreshock that happened in May of 1985. This is the epicenter of the main earthquake that happened in September of 1985. This is the epicenter of the first major aftershock that happened on the next day after the main earthquake. Here's the epicenter of the second major aftershock, which happened on the 30th of April 1986, months after the main earthquake. And here's our next overview of the area. Alright, so now we're gonna take a look at part of this article. You could pause the video and take a look at the graphic. It shows the rupture zones for the main earthquake and the two major aftershocks, as well as other major earthquakes in that area. Alright, so it was said that the main earthquake caused widespread death and injuries and catastrophic damage in Mexico's capital, which is Mexico City. Let's take a look again at where the earthquake happened using USGS. The yellow star is the earthquake's epicenter. The red spiky line is the convergent plate boundary subduction zone. Those other red lines are different types of plate boundaries. Alright, so now I'll be using the measure distance feature on Google Maps to measure the distance of the location of the earthquake's epicenter to Mexico City. Mexico City came up to being around 388 kilometers away from the earthquake's epicenter using a straight line measurement. Alright, so now I'll try to explain how Mexico City faced such catastrophic destruction even though the earthquake's epicenter was pretty far away. Let's try to take a historical look at the geography of the land in Mexico City. Let's take a look at this Wikipedia article. There was a lake called Texcoco. It was a natural saline lake within the Valley of Mexico. A natural saline lake is a landlocked body of water with a high concentration of salts and dissolved minerals. Here is what the lake could have probably looked like in 1519. It is said that the lake is best known for an island on the western side where the Aztecs built the city of Tenochtitlan, which would later become the capital of the Aztec Empire. Notice that there were other lakes connected to Lake Texcoco. Alright, so we're gonna take a short look at this article. The ancient city was built on two islands, and the area was extended using small ancient man-made islands which were created above the waterline and were later strengthened. Those small islands were made for agriculture. Causeways, which are like bridges, and also dams, connected the islands to the mainland and separated the fresh water from the salt water, protecting the man-made islands. When the Aztecs surrendered when the Spanish laid siege to them, the lake was drained and much of Mexico City rests in the basin of the lake. This is what the Valley of Mexico and Mexico City looks like today. Here's a map that I found online that shows where Lake Texcoco was once located. Here's a better look at the map. Alright, so we're gonna take a look at part of this document. This is another map of the lake showing the location of the man-made islands and some other things, as well as it shows where Mexico City and the greater Mexico City is located. It was said that although some damage happened in Michoacan and the surrounding regions, the most destruction was concentrated in Mexico City, which is because of the unique topography upon which the city is seated on. Mexico City, which was constructed on a dry lake bed, endured the heaviest shaking because of loose ancient lake sediments, which amplified the earthquake's shock waves. The ground motion in the city measured 5 times more in the outlying districts, which had different soil foundations. Concrete buildings in the city of 5 to 15 stories high were most affected because their interaction with the earthquake's shock waves created something called a harmonic resonance, which caused the buildings to sway more than usual. As a result of the earthquake, more than 400 buildings collapsed and thousands more were damaged. Harmonic resonance happens when an external vibration, frequency, or force matches a system's natural frequency, causing it to vibrate with significantly larger amplitudes. This phenomenon causes energy to accumulate and magnify, which can be destructive forces in physical structures. Another reason as to why there was so much destruction was because of the duration of the earthquake. It was said that ground shaking lasted more than 5 minutes in places along the coast, and parts of Mexico City shook for 3 minutes, with an average shaking time of 3 to 4 minutes. The prolonged shaking was a result of multiple breaks in the fault line, which moved about 3 meters. The destruction of buildings were not the only type of destruction that happened. Let's take a look at some of the other types of destruction that happened. Alright, so let's take a look at this impact summary from USGS. There were landslides, rock slides, sand blows, and ground cracks that were observed in some areas. Alright, so we'll be taking a look at part of this article. The damage from the earthquake was not restricted to the effects of the ground shaking. The earthquake was responsible for setting off the largest fire in the history of Mexico City. 6 high-rise buildings that were intact stood around the collapsed Hotel Regis, but were later destroyed by fire. There were approximately 400 structure fires that happened in Mexico City because of the main 1985 earthquake and its aftershocks. Furthermore, the main earthquake caused Mexico City to lose its electricity, but it was restored on the next day. However, when the first major aftershock happened, they lost their electricity again. Mexico City also faced damage to their telephone system, which prevented telephone communication within the city for several days. Alright, so we're gonna take a look at some graphics in this document. Here's a graphic showing the location in Mexico City where major damage happened. Here is another graphic which is basically in the same location, and it shows the location of collapsed or severely damaged buildings. Here's a screenshot from Google Maps of that modern day area in Mexico City with Tlatelolco highlighted as a reference. Here's another screenshot from Google Maps of basically the same area, but this time with Alameda Square or Alameda Central as the reference point. Alright, so we're gonna take a look at part of this article. It was said that within the earthquake's rupture area, there was coastal uplift that happened ranging from about 12 centimeters to about 1 meter high, and that there were no observations of any part of the land that sank. Because of this uplift, it generated a tsunami. However, since the uplift wasn't that high, and I assume that it happened in somewhat shallow water, these two factors resulted in a small tsunami, which was not that destructive. Alright, so we're gonna take a look at part of this article. It said that more than 10,000 people died as a result of the main earthquake. Around 30,000 people were injured, and an estimated amount of 250,000 people were left homeless. Alright, so I suggest that on your own time you should go and read this document. I did not completely read it, but I saw that it was given some good information about the earthquake and the destruction caused by it. You could also go and read this article as well. Yet again, I did not completely read this. However, I did see that it was given insightful information about the event. Alright, so now I just want to share some of my thoughts and opinions about some of the things that happened. Alright, so let's take a look at part of this article. It says that the teleseismic long period seismographs shows that the first earthquake consisted of two sub-events, which was separated in time by 27 seconds. The local strong motion data indicated that the second sub-event occurred about 95 kilometers southeast of the first one. Based off of the information that I just read, it would seem as though there were two different earthquakes which happened close to each other, and I suppose that they were of the same magnitude size. This makes me feel like this was a doublet earthquake, like the one that recently happened in Venezuela. And since that it was 1985, there probably wasn't any type of equipment that could have been used to identify the doublet earthquake, or the researchers at the time did not know what a doublet earthquake was. This could be the reason as to why there are two different epicenter locations. It was probably two different earthquakes around the same magnitude size, and for some reason the researchers didn't know that it was a doublet earthquake. Hence the reason why you see that some people have two different epicenter locations, only mentioning one earthquake and not two earthquakes. I took the coordinates of both of the epicenter locations, and I used this website to measure the distance between them, and it came up to being about 65.39 kilometers away, which is definitely not the same as 95 kilometers, but the one in the sea is definitely a southeastern direction away from the one on land. If it was really two different earthquakes, it could also explain why USGS and Wikipedia have two different hypocenters. USGS is using the information for one of the earthquakes and Wikipedia is using the information of the other earthquake. Because of the two different proposed epicenter locations, the different hypocenter values, and reading that it was a sub-event, it makes me feel like it was a doublet earthquake. Or maybe I'm assuming too much and it was not a doublet earthquake. I would also like to re-mention that I was just sharing my thoughts. I am not a geologist, so I could be wrong. Anyways, here's a conclusion of all the key information. There was a 5.2 foreshock on the 28th of May 1985. On the 19th of September 1985, the main magnitude 8 earthquake occurred. There is dispute about where the epicenter was located. Here are the two possible epicenter locations that I found online. There is also different accounts of the hypocenter. The shallower the earthquake's hypocenter, the more destructive it will be. On the day after the main earthquake, which was on the 20th of September 1985, a magnitude 7.6 aftershock occurred. More than 6 months after the main earthquake, which was in September of 1985, a magnitude 7 aftershock occurred on the 30th of April 1986. Most of the damage from the earthquake happened in Mexico City, which was about 388 kilometers away from the earthquake's epicenter. Mexico City faced a lot of destruction because it was built on top of an ancient saline lake that was drained. The loose ancient lake sediments under the city were amplified by the earthquake's shock waves, which caused the buildings to sway more than usual. This resulted in collapsed or damaged buildings. The duration of the earthquake was around 3 to 4 minutes in Mexico City, which contributed to the destruction. There were also other destruction caused by the earthquake, such as landslides, rock slides, sand blows, and ground cracks. There were also multiple fires, and there was even the loss of electricity and telephone communication in Mexico City. Because of the main earthquake, there was a small amount of coastal uplift, which resulted in a small, non-threatening tsunami. More than 250,000 people were affected by this earthquake. Some people had died, some people were injured, and the majority of the people were left homeless. Alright, so now we're going to give you a list of YouTube videos that you could watch. You could go and watch this YouTube video. It gives more scientific information about how the earthquake happened. So if you're interested in that type of stuff, you could go and watch this video. You could also go and watch this YouTube video, but be aware that it contains distressing content. You don't have to watch the full video. You could skip to 13 minutes and 20 seconds into the video, and then you could stop watching when you reach 22 minutes and 43 seconds into the video. But feel free to watch the whole video if you want to. Within this time frame, they speak about the earthquake and explained what had happened. You could also go and watch this YouTube video. It shows real footage of the aftermath and rescue attempts. However, I must mention that the video contains distressing content. Alright, so that's about it for this video. Feel free to watch over the video to take in all the information again. And anyways people, Jesus bless.